Thank you very much, Nils, for this very interesting presentation. Maintenant, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir Monsieur Yo de Kock, qui est administrateur général de l'INAMI et qui va vous parler de choses bien sérieuses. Yo, sérieuses.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I will talk in English, but respond, of course, to questions in any language you want. Of course, it is an hot issue. It's a serious issue, but it's also a hot issue and hot topic in the discussions. And it will be and not stay a hot topic, and it will stay not only on the scene of your academia, but also on the political scene. Let's be clear for that, both on the national and on the international level, for sure. Thank for the invitation. Also, thank to Professor Wilking for these figures. I have some other figures about the evolution of pharmaceutical expenditure related to cancer care, and of course my slides will be also sent out, no problem on that. Let's look what's happened between 2010 and 2018 is the last full year we have. It's based not on our accounting data, but on our data of PharmaNet and the hospital-related data. You can see that our overall budget is attaining for the moment 5 billion euros. Of that, we have in fact three main streams. Public pharmacies, in which you see that there was no growth at all. There was a volume growth, but no price growth. Between the last 8 years, it was a stable evolution, and you can see that also on the reactions of our pharmacists, who are seeing that, of course, there is no increase anymore for them. And they are a little bit squeezed between hospitals in which, of course, these new drugs are sold, and also the media markets and medi-markets who are offering for parapharmacy also products on lower prices. And this gives, of course, also some discussion. But that's not the topic of today. The topic of today is not also the hospital and patient care, in which we have for people who are stayed in a hospital for more than one night. This evolution is more or less, it's 90% of the evolution in between 2010 and 2018. There's a decrease of 10% points in these years. It's due, of course, also to new financing mechanisms which were introduced in this field. But look to the hospital outpatient care, and there, of course, we are confronted with not only cancer care, but other innovative therapies which are delivered in most of them in a one-day hospital stay, and which in 8 years it's more than doubled in our country. Total increase 23%. Good news, we have a budget for 2020. It was not an easy thing. Increase of pharmaceuticals there is 7.2%. But when you look to the hospital outpatient increase, we will going over the 10% for sure. That's for clear. And the question, of course, and that was also what you asked, is the sustainability of this evolution. So let's focus on cancer. Let's focus on cancer. You can see that of the overall budget of 5 billion euros, nearly 20% for the moment is spent on cancer care, both on oncologiques in the broad sense of the word and on immunotherapies, which come in the market as from 2017-2018. You can see that there's an increase from 8% to 20%. It doubles. The question is, of course, can we afford that in the long way, knowing that, of course, we have already seen the pipeline greatness, not air pipeline, but a pipeline of EMA and FDA, which is of course causing a lot of concern. Together with the announcement of FDA and EMA about the gene therapies who are coming up, of course, we are confronted with huge problems. Often I give the example, when you follow the example of FDA, which announced recently that in 2030, in 10 years, there will be 50 gene therapies on the market. Of course, it's a complicated one. Let's see if this promise, if it is a promise, will be realized. Nevertheless, when we account for 50 patients in Belgium, for 50 products, at a price of €1 million, it's not a willingness to pay, be sure, but we are at 2.5 billion. It's the half of our budget in 10 years, which is not sustainable as such. Let's be clear, I'm a little bit blunt in these things, but we have to act on that, otherwise we are, of course, going out of business. And you can see, of course, the increase, an overall increase in 8 years of 23%, but of 170% as far as going to oncology is, of course, an important issue. Here you can see where are these products used. You see 103, but in fact it's 100. It's 100 hospitals in Belgium. And you can see what they are spending each on oncology and immunotherapy. The green line is immunotherapy. 2018, it will increase, be sure. And the other line is the oncologiques in general, always. But you can see that 2/3 of these costs are situated in less than 20 hospitals. And I think that's one of the answers already. I will not talk on pricing for the moment, but of course we have there something which allows us to tackle and to discuss these problems with, of course, treatment centers which are experienced with these cancer drugs. I don't say we have to exclude them to give exclusivity to the hospitals. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying only that there are 20 hospitals in which, of course, we can get data, for instance, we get information, we get follow-up, and so on, and so on. Let's be careful of that. Professor Wilking knows this very well, because he's one of the authors of these articles, and it's giving some philosophical questions. But before treat them then, of course, it's not only price which is influencing and contributing to cancer medicine budget growth. There are a lot of factors which are playing a role. Of course, and I think when we look finally to the figures and standardize it not only on PPP but also on age, you can have another image. We are confronted with aging populations, more patients being treated. Let's be clear of that. There is a lot of increase. We are also, and I come back to that, not always too efficient spending on these products. We are confronted, of course, with expensive treatments, CAR-Ts, immunotherapies, new technology which are high-priced and high-costly. Probably, I'm not an oncologist, I'm not even a medical doctor, not even a scientist. I'm a simple lawyer, and I try to understand what's going on in society. And of course, we see also that there are differences in treatment protocols, treatment use, differences in use, in treatments, sometimes with not always great evidence. We have the speed of innovation. Let's not underestimate that. And when I'm turn back to this pipeline, 1/3 of medication is coming out of oncologists, but you have seen the figures. This is amazing. This is amazing, and this space, also of science. It's not only prices, but also the space, the speed of this evolution we have to manage, and which is not an easy thing. The duration of treatment, we have seen that a longer survival, but is this also linked with treatments and pharmaceutical treatment? Is this, of course, increasing costs, but also, of course, saving lives and contributing to healthy life? More and more, and I come back to that, we are confronted with difficult problems as combination therapies, in which it's not easy to say who is doing what, and can we attribute these elements to one product or to a whole treatment, which is, of course, immediately opening the question of how to deal with pricing, how to deal with treatment costs on that. We are confronted with off-label use, and of course we are also confronted with the prices itself. I come back to that. And there's two main questions. They are philosophical, but they are, of course, extremely important. What happens when the cost of cancer care becomes unsustainable? We can write another article. What happens when the cost of other treatments becomes sustainable? It's not blaming cancer care as such, but nevertheless we see a lot of evolutions in that sense. And of course, what happens then, and you see what happens in some countries, there is no access. They will take blunt measures in order to limit access. They will take linear cuts in the health budget, which is, of course, destabilizing. On this question, there is no answer. What happens when the cost of healthcare becomes unsustainable? We have to find answers, which is limit, of course, the growth of the budgets as a whole, and see which room of improvement in the whole budget is possible. Knowing that, of course, in the future we are not confronting anymore with the 80s or the 90s, we are confronted with another economic situation, which is a situation of less economic growth, but also high social spending, especially on pensions. And when you look to the European reports on pensions, you see that on social expenditure is a lot of competition, which will go on what is our priority. And we come back then later on. Can we afford and continue to afford access to treatment? We are, of course, obliged to do so. And the cost of cancer is, of course, a key component of this rising healthcare costs. But we have to question it. Why these prices are so high? Is it due to research? Are there other factors? When I read in some articles of OECD saying, okay, when we look about the price increases and the benefits, which is confronted with over the 15 or 20 years, we see that for one life year gained, there's an increase of 10% a year, which is doubling every 7 years, which is not possible in the future. How to manage that and so on. Of course, innovation must continue, but the first thing we can respond for innovation is that, of course, there are improved patient outcomes without any doubt, and based on real endpoints and so on. That's a question of fast access. We are stimulated to reimburse as fast as possible, but with great uncertainties, and people who are sitting in the reimbursement commission know that very well. How can you value something in which you have more questions than answers for the moment? Have we appropriate resource allocation? And there's a question of robust evidence, health, HTA, and so on. And of course, are we addressing adequately the problem of cancer? As Professor Wilking said, 40% of the cancers, of most of the cancers, are preventable. This, are we doing sufficiently on that field also, in order not to spend too much money? It's a question of innovation and so on. Okay, that's our first answers on this question. And of course, the challenges are clear, and was recently said by the European Cancer Leagues that, of course, what we have to strive to is to have a needs-driven system, not a supply-driven system, but a system which responding on unmet medical needs. All too, you can have a lot of discussion what is considered as unmet medical needs. That's for sure. cross-sectoral. It's not pharmaceutical, but it's integrated in a multidisciplinary approach, and also based on good epidemiological research, efficient and effective, equitable, accessible, available and affordable. I think that's the missions, that are the principles on which we have to find responses. And a year earlier they said, okay, let's talk access. It was clearly stated that in Europe there are huge differences. With the new commission which is upcoming and which is announcing a cancer plan, a cancer beating plan, of course it's important to see that. And we see a lot of disparity in availability of products. The question is, can European reference networks play their role? What happens with parallel trade? Because we have seen that in Greece. Nobody is looking to Greece, but you can see that the cancer cost was more than halved in this 10 years. We have, of course, a question of tackling on an appropriate way the problem of pricing, intellectual property, and so on. See what alternatives are. We have to look a little bit at the regulatory and systemic issues, such as on which conditions products enter the market. Are these endpoints good defined? Are there as rapid as possible contacts with payers? You know that in Belgium we have launched recently the International Horizon Scanning Initiative. The question is, of course, with 9 countries for the moment, probably 3 will join the club. The question is, and the tender will send out starting last year. Purpose is to check pipelines, clinical trials, all what's going on, and have, of course, signals and signs on situations where we, as payer, find it needed to have, due to the impact, which is estimated, that it should be useful to have this early dialogues as possible with industry, but also with EMA, in order to set up, of course, new methods of discussions. And of course, we have also to deal with innovation innovative models, both on pricing, on patient involvement, and so on. I think that's very clear. That's another, and you see, and it was very clear, also stressed by Professor Wilking, that Belgium is not the last in class. No, I think we are, of course, doing as fast as possible what we try to do, reimburse medication which is showing sufficient evidence. But there's a price. That's another thing. Let's assure access. Do we assure access? Is access reimbursed as soon as possible? Is this reimbursing at a price which is affordable? Is access, of course, also quality of care, and so on? You know, that is a very important discussion which was going on earlier this year in the World Health Organization, saying, okay, we should find a better balance between, of course, the economic goals and the health system related goals, as far as we are confronted with this new policies, new products, and innovation as a whole. Of course, economic goals are clear. It's achieving prices of medicines that are financially sustainable, promote efficiency, enhance competition, which is also a very important thing. We were confronted the last 20 years with generics, now a little bit with biosimilars, in which Belgium is not a good student. But we will confront that there is no alternative when there is no competition, and which is not, of course, when you look to the future, also an embarrassing situation. Of course, we should promote innovation, that's for sure, that's as already said several times. And of course, there is also the the importance to see, okay, innovative industry should have fair rewards. But we have also the health systems goals, which is applying principles on transparency, accountability, prescribing, use, dispensing practices, and so on. All these balances should be taken into account. And I go not in detail because it's a very technical report. It's named also technical report about these things. But one thing I will pick out is transparency. It was already said that on the field on transparency there is a lot of discussion, also in our parliament, but also in different parliaments. Look what's happened in France. I come back to that. What's happened in France last 2 weeks about the discussion. We have also resolutions and proposals in Parliament which are dealing with the question of transparency and the rebates which are and the contracts which are going on. Of course, this is an important issue which has no easy solution. It was also the World Health Organization in April this year who adopted a resolution in which was clearly stated we should take appropriate measures to publicly share information on the net prices. We should work collaboratively to improve the reporting of information by suppliers, such as reports of sales revenues, prices, units sold, marketing costs, subsidies and incentives, and so on. Of course, there are two types of transparency. There is the transparency of the industry and there is the transparency of the net prices. There are two different things we have to deal with. There's clearly on the societal front high push of NGOs, but also on political side to have more clarity on what's happening. It's not accounting of exercises we should do, but we should know which is the rationale. And we know already, and it was said, I think, by Great also, that efficiency and research and development should be one of the elements. I come back to a proposal which was done recently by Professor Earl de Groot in the Netherlands and repeated 2 weeks ago in Amsterdam, that claiming that EU drug approval should include price evaluation and fair negotiation. Thus we are confronting with huge discussions which can a little bit looking for new social contracts, as someone has said, in this field. This is not a good model because it's counting what are the costs, and then we will see what the price is and we will give a fair reward. Okay, the question is, what will we learn of that? Question also of transparency when it comes to rebate is another one. It's a question of good governance in first line. It is also a question that we are thinking in every country that it's a little bit the beggar by your neighbor principle. We are thinking that every payer believes that it is getting the best price, but cannot verify this. And largely we are negotiating in the dark. Of course, and it was clearly stated, also increased transparency will not solve the problem of affordable drugs as such, but it could enable some more evidence on health policy making. There is no evidence, and it was clearly stated also in the technical report of OECD, that putting all these rebates on the market will lead to lower prices. I'm not convinced of it. There is no evidence. There is evidence in developing countries. There is no evidence in Western world situations, and we should have some discussions and economic analysis therefrom. Nevertheless, we are started up, and that's the answer of Belgium and a lot of other countries, to work together and to start joint negotiations in which we can exchange information and in which we can, of course, increase our bargaining power to the manufacturers and the companies we are discussing with. And I think something can be done, but we are also in a European market confronted with parallel trade, European reference pricing, and such on. And it's not an easy thing to discuss. It's not. We have to see what are the consequences of these policies. In some views it can lead to higher prices, and especially, I'm afraid, that it will not serve these countries which are cannot afford already this drug, because we are evolving then to what some are pleading for, an European price, in which of course the countries with the lowest economic power will lose a lot. This is not an easy debate, you understand that, and of course it's important to have agendas and tables of negotiations in which we can deal with these issues. I know it's very difficult for groups of companies and associations, both for Pharma BE and FPA, to discuss on that, but there is no way back. We have to sit on the table on the highest political level. Other answers, of course, managed entry agreements, and then we are coming, of course, that for mostly for the time they are simply financially oriented managed entry agreements. More and more, nevertheless, we are evolving to new models of these managed entry agreements, which are more focusing on outcomes, which are more focusing also on having more data on the table. We are discussing then on real-world evidence. I will not talk about real-world data, but as people of ERTC, and I see Professor Meunier in the room, of course we are pleading also for knowing what's happening in practice. What is the duration of the therapy? It was already mentioned. What's the dose we should use? How can we improve the situation for the moment? There are a lot of questions. It's not only a question of access. Access is only one element of a broader puzzle. Removing the blindfold of medicine pricing, okay, it's interesting to read. That's transparency, as you know. That's very transparent. But I don't know if we can buy something in this field of cancer medicines. Nevertheless, then we can organize crowdfunding, for instance, as it was done in other situations. I've already mentioned the question of combination therapies, which is a huge, difficult one, to come to what is the result, and also should we deal with on a practical way, and in effect, how can we attribute to every constituent a fair price, especially when it is coming from different ways and for different manufacturers. We are confronted with a huge problem. We are also confronted then on the regulatory element, but also on HTA. There's a very, in fact, what a simple rule is: 1 + 1 is not 3. That's the rule, and one is not 2 neither. That's also a simple rule. The question is, what is 1 to 1, and are we talking of 1 to 1? That's the first question, which are coming before. These are not easy discussions, but they are inevitable, and we will be confronted with that. Timely access, ATMPs. It's clear that on that field I mentioned already. Gene therapies and so on, cancer therapies are also involving. I will not in that. The last thing, of course, is the clinical benefits. I hope we will have more evidence on that, but nevertheless, last year's a lot of publications are published, and last in September even on ESMO conference, Mark Rodwin and his colleagues of France clearly stressed the results, the clinical benefits measured on different frameworks, measured on the ESMO framework and measured on the ASCO framework. What are the clinical benefits? Are we paying the right price? That's another thing. How high is the price, but are we paying the right price for the benefit? And how to correct that? That's another thing, and you know all these publications. And for instance, new drugs, where did we go wrong and what can we do better? It's a publication which is of amazing importance. It was published by the heads of IQWiC in Germany. When a few days later after this publication, a lot of discussion went on in German newspapers about, okay, how can we correct? And we will see that there's a lot of discussions. What we will do, for instance, is of course see with the data we have, claims data, but all other data, eventually of this 20 center I thought earlier on, to say, okay, how can we measure a little bit what's happening and what's in the long time survival in order to have a more flexible pricing system. Now you are in the pricing system, it's impossible to review and to, but we have to have a continuous evaluation in which more flexible mechanisms are coming on. That is possible in markets where where there's not a lot of competition. Of course, cancer treatment we see also there is coming up more and more different, and also in other sectors where they are responding on medical need. But nevertheless, we have to look to new payment models, not the payment models which are proposed by MIT, for instance, with upfront payments and so on. No, we have to pay after performance, pay for performance. I say always pay after performance, and say, okay, let's start with a price which is a comparator. Of course, a comparator, when you are comparing a price with something which is ineffective, what are you doing then? That's also a question of HTA, and on this field, of course, a lot of discussions are going on, also with regard to the European proposal of regulation on HTA. Treatment optimization, I mentioned already, and of course, it's a global approach which should be taken into account. Great mentioned already our discussions with a different group of stakeholders, industry, sickness funds, providers, oncologists, payers, and so on, also people of our agency. And what came out, of course, there's a discussion of price. Is it one element, and we will come back later in the discussions in this forum. But what are suggestions to approve elements? It was specialized hospital centers. Let's deal with that and see how can we manage. And there were three proposals: outcome-based agreements, adapt them and modernize them, with also renegotiation of some products and so on. It's a question of outcome-based agreements 2.0, 3.0. And the third great line, there are no conclusions, be sure, is of course generate economies in other sectors. But it's clear that we should have sufficient attention to patient outcomes, creating and have sufficient attention to the silos, huge also the right potential which in it, and use also appropriate value frameworks. And you can read, I will not repeat it, that's patient involvement, very important. When you read the last report, Patient Insights on Cancer Care Opportunities for Improving Efficiency, you will find a little bit about access, but you will see a lot about accompanying the patients, psychological issues. These are confronted with fatigue, how to deal with, where it's coming from. This was clearly stressed, and we are also people of Belgium which were asked to give their view on it. And then the European Master Plan, we don't know what will be in. We have some elements we can try to guess, because it's a little bit based on the plan of the former candidate for the European presidency, Mr. Weber of Germany. And of course, he is not talking a lot on access, but on research, on health data. He is asked to set up also reference centers and so on. That's the way, of course, dealing also with the competences of the European Union. We will not talk about pricing and reimbursement. We will see what's coming out and who will launch this program. Tomorrow the new European Commission will be launched. We will see in 100 days what is the proposal which is on the table. But I think when there are sufficient proposals which are responding to some of the questions we are discussed here, I think it would be a good thing. When I look back to the plan of Weber, it's about big data and European Digital Cancer Center. But European Digital Cancer Center is not a stupid idea, especially when we talk about clinical benefits and the follow-up quality of cancer care, which is clearly a question of benchmarking who is doing what and where do we have the right results. It's not only investing the most in cancer care. We see that Switzerland is doing the most. Are they the most efficient in cancer care? I don't know. I think some studies say the opposite. They are doing well, let's be clear, but they could be more efficient in early detection, clearly stressed and prevention, and of course also give a research boost to the innovators, the truly innovators, based on qualitative, high-standing and new methods of health technology assessment. That were some messages. I thank you.